Good evening. Since we are unable to gather at church right now, I thought I'd bring church to you this evening. One thing you may have noticed since we've been in our church building are these plants. You can see one of them over my shoulder here. They're on either side of the front of the church. Unlike some of the plants we have around here, these are real. And I'm no gardener, so I can't guarantee that what I'm about to share with you is 100% accurate, but from what I can gather, these are Sansevieria plants. They're better known as snake plants or even mother-in-law's tongue. In case my mother-in-law is watching, I have no idea why that might be the case, why they may be called that. I certainly do not feel that way. That's what others say. Anyways, the thing about these plants is they are incredibly resilient. They can be neglected for long periods of time. They can survive low light and a lack of water. All the while, they maintain their fresh, sturdy look, which makes them the perfect plant to have around church, as I'm not good about watering plants regularly. And finally, perhaps illustrating these other characteristics, they can live a long time. These plants in particular are about 10 years old. It's a picture of what Jesus once said in Matthew chapter 13, verses 31 through 32. We're told this. He, that being Jesus, told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed, which a man took and planted in his field. Though it is the smallest of all your seeds, yet when it grows, it is the largest of garden plants and becomes a tree, so that the birds of the air come and perch in its branches. It's a great picture of the kingdom of heaven that God talks about in Scripture. That is the way that God works in our hearts. A mustard seed didn't look like much. But back in Jesus' day, this seed grew into the largest plant in their garden. Many people even think this plant was something of a weed. In other words, it wasn't just the largest plant, it grew persistently. And all this from one tiny seed. That's good for us to hear right now. Because in many ways it may feel like the work of the church is being blunted. At best, we can only hold steady right now if we don't go backwards, that is. Whether that's personally in our faith or just as a mission congregation that was just starting to get its footing. Except those thoughts aren't true, because that's not how God tells us His kingdom, the kingdom of heaven, works. No, His kingdom is something that turns into something even bigger than what we can see or imagine. Have you noticed that with this whole coronavirus situation? For me, it was this past weekend when I was sitting with my boys watching myself lead a service online. It was definitely a strange experience, but it was a good one. You see, as a pastor, it's not often that I get a chance to sit with my boys in church, explain what's happening in the service, and also reinforce that church isn't just for the weekend or something that happens in a building. It's for home, too. But the last 2 weeks and for however long this lasts, I get to do that. In other words, my boys are better off for this situation. Maybe you've already seen how this can be a blessing for you too. In a situation where we feel small and powerless, subject to the whims of disease or government restriction, and yet God is using this to do something good for you, something you or your family needs. Maybe you're already seeing this, or maybe you haven't seen it just yet. But either way, keep looking. God will work for the good of those who love Him. That's what He promises in His Word. And that means He will work the situation for your good also. After all, that's what God perfectly did with what we are about to celebrate next week. With Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday, and Easter Sunday. The bread and wine in Lord's Supper may look small. Jesus looked small on that cross. God looked small in the tomb. But in the bread and wine of Holy Communion, you receive Jesus' true body and blood, which gives you life. On the cross, Christ crucified sin and hell and killed them. At the tomb, Jesus rose with death's corpse lying behind him. It's why we will still have reason to celebrate as we go into next week, even if it may end up being the strangest Holy Week celebration of our lives. By the way, I haven't shared my favorite part about these plants. They belong to a woman by the name of Margaret Schwenke. Most of you have no idea who that is. I never met her myself, personally. Margaret is the mother of our member Eric, who passed away 9 years ago. Margaret, that is. Eric is still very much alive and with us. And if it weren't for Mrs. Schwenke, as she was affectionately called, we probably wouldn't be here today. During the lean years, where Grace was just a preaching station, during those times where we didn't have a lot of airmen on base, Mrs. Schwenke was instrumental in keeping the church going. And back then, they probably never would have imagined our small church, as we may think of it, being as big as it is right now. Kind of like you wouldn't imagine her plant still growing and thriving 10 years later. Same plant. Again, this is how God works. This is the kingdom of heaven. A mustard seed that will grow in amazing ways. God has kept that promise for you and me in the past. He will keep it in the future. Trust Him to do that and continue to go to His Word, through which God feeds us and nurtures us. God bless you and have a great night.